So I was going to play some old school Bollywood songs, but after some digging around, I realized that the piano I built does not have the full range of notes required to make that happen. So yeah. In any case, hello everyone, my name is Suboptimal and I make videos about tech and productivity. In this video, I will go over how to code a piano using reactjs. And this video is going to be split up into 3 sections. First, we'll be designing the technical architecture of this project. Next, we'll build the piano UI in React. And finally, we will handle user inputs from the keyboard and actually play the piano. If you want the full details, I highly suggest you check out the code for this project, which is on my GitHub under the code reviews repo, and it's linked down in the description box below. Full disclosure, guys, I literally started learning React last Monday, so feel free to roast my React skills down in the comments below. And before we get started, I'm going to ask for one small favor from you guys, and that is to leave a like for the YouTube algorithm. It does take me a bit of time to plan and edit these videos, so a small like goes a long way in helping me and the channel out. Awesome, let's jump right in. So before you start coding a project, you need to have a good understanding of the requirements that you want to build out. Now, usually when you're working as a full-time engineer, the requirements are given to you, so you don't have to think about this. But if you're doing your own project, you need to create the requirements yourself. Now, it's a little bit backwards to look at this full piano and try to determine what the requirements of this piano should be. But for the case of this tutorial, I think it's fine. So clearly the smallest component is going to be an individual key. So we can set that as our smallest React component. So the next question we would ask ourselves is, what is a key composed of? So here's a closer look at the keys. And this subset of keys kind of just represents all types of keys you can see. So you can see keys that are white keys, black keys, and pressed keys. Each of these keys needs to track the note that the key represents. So this key is the F key, this is the G, this is the A key, this is the B key. This would be considered the B flat key, things like that. So we need to make sure that each of our keys tracks the specific note that it is supposed to represent. Additionally, the key also needs to track whether or not it is white or black. And finally, we also need to make sure that the key tracks whether or not it is playing. So if the key is being played, then we want to change the color to blue. So these are going to be like the 3 things that we should keep in mind when we are constructing our piano. So now that we have a vague understanding of our smallest component, which is the key, let's think about the piano itself. So a piano is going to be composed of 12 keys. Additionally, our piano is going to need to track some input. Suppose I press the button Z, right? If I press Z, then I want to make sure that we track Z and we're playing the note C. And of course, finally, the piano is going to have to play notes. So right now, all we're doing is just getting a vague understanding of how to go about to build our piano. Usually, like when you're working as an engineer, you'll be given these requirements, but since we're building our own project, it's just good to design your architecture before you actually code it out, or just have an idea of how it works. The quickest way to get started with a React project is to run npx create react app and specify a project name. And when I went into that directory and ran npm start, you'll get a basic React app that looks like this. And then we can finally start actually coding. So the first thing you're going to notice is that you'll be given a app.css app.js file, and basically app.js file is going to be where the main entry point for the code is located. So what we want to do is initially just set up our app so that we have our piano and key component that we discussed. So right now that's all I'm doing. Inside of the src folder where app.js is located, I created a components folder. And this is where we're just going to be storing all our components. Now, is this the best way? I don't know. You could probably store the piano.js file inside directly of the src. Honestly, I just felt like calling it components was the best way to do it. So that's why I created a components folder. And inside of it, I created this piano class. We're going to have to extend the React component. A quick little feature of React is that inside of a class, there's a render function. And inside of this render function, you can just basically return JSX, which is a combination of HTML and JavaScript. In this case, I'm just returning some basic HTML. We create a class, a piano class, and then we import that class into our app.js file. This is our app.js file, which is located right here. And we remove all the boilerplate code, and all we do is call that piano. And when React sees this tag, this piano tag, it goes to piano right over here, and it looks at what is inside of the render function. In this case, all we're doing is rendering an h1 tag. So what we would expect to see is literally just the word piano with an exclamation mark, which replaces this old code right over here. So let's just confirm that that is happening. Cool. So right now we literally just set up some boilerplate piano code. So now what we want to do is create a key component. As we mentioned, the two components we care about are the piano and the key. So the key component is going to be basically the same thing. We're just going to create a class that extends a React component, and it's going to render just some basic text. In this case, we're going to import the key class into our piano.js file. So our piano is going to import key, but our app is going to import our piano. So that's just how you got to think about it. And right here, all we're doing is displaying the three separate keys. So what we would expect is the word key to be displayed 3 times in a row. So let's see what happens. Cool. All we really did up until this point is just set up the key component and the piano component and made sure that they work. So this is how I always like to start projects, is to just build out the base components and just have like a little bit of a structure so that I have an idea of what is going on. So now let's try to just add some CSS to actually display a key. And how are we going to do that? Remember, what we had before was just some h1 tag that said display key. But now we're going to have a div. And what is this div going to look like? So that's where this class name comes in. So I'm going to create this class inside of key.css. So the height is going to be 300 pixels. The width is going to be 60 pixels. So you can just think of this to be a rectangle with a white background and a border that is black. So yeah, I mean, we're basically just drawing a key at this point. And one other thing that we actually have to do is add some CSS styling to our piano class. And we're going to create that in our piano.css file. And inside here, all we're going to have to do is change the direction of these keys. So right now, if we have key like this without this class name, what's going to happen is that the keys are going to be displayed in one column. But in fact, we want them to be displayed in one row, right? So we're just going to change the display to flex and set the flex direction to row. And now let's see what our app is going to look like. Awesome. So now we can finally see a little bit of a piano coming together, but we only have 3 keys. So let's add all the keys in and see what it looks like now. So now all I'm doing is adding all the keys in. Now at this point, I realized that, it's probably good to keep track of the note of the key. So now I'm going to add a new prop to the key that is getting passed from our piano class into our key class. So when we render this, the key class will now be able to determine these notes. Previously, we just displayed a div with key in it, but now let's actually display the note as well. We can simply just do this.props.note, which is going to get the property that is passed into the key. And we might as well add a little bit of styling to this so it just doesn't look like absolute garbage. And what I'm going to do is add a class called key text. Honestly, I was just playing with the figures till it looked right. So let's see what this looks like for our piano now. As you can see, we basically just put all 12 keys, and inside of the piano, we're passing in the notes, and those notes are styled inside of our key component. But let's be honest here. This code looks kind of messy. If we wanted to add more keys and maybe pass in more props to the key, it's going to get really long. So let's do a little bit of refactoring. Let's create a global folder right next to our components folder and have some constants in it. Let's add a notes constant. So C, D flat, D, E flat, etc., etc. Basically, whatever we passed in before, we can create a constant, and now we can do a little bit of refactoring inside of our piano class. So we're going to import the notes from our constants file. Inside the piano class, what we're going to do is iterate through the notes, right? We're iterating through the notes, and as we're iterating through the notes, what we're going to do is create a key. Once we construct that array of keys, so we just display keys, and yeah, this will basically get it to work. One interesting thing about React is that you might get an error like this. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So in the previous code, we didn't really need to do that. We didn't need to pass in any sort of extra prop. We could just pass in the note. But when you map through the notes like this, you get this error. And that's why I pass in the note as well as the index as props to the key component. This is just to get rid of this error. I'm not even sure it's fully necessary to get rid of it. We don't really do anything advanced with our piano, so in this case it probably would have been fine to let it be, but I just don't like seeing these sorts of errors. And yeah, so all we really did up until this point is refactor the code. So we made our piano, which looked like this, into a piano that looked like this. I think it just looks a little bit cleaner, so that's just kind of why I went along and did it. So looking at this piano, we can clearly see that all the flat notes are not looking how they're supposed to be looking, right? So now let's actually ensure that our flat keys are looking the way they're supposed to look. First, let's take a look at this CSS file. If you guys remember, I had a key class and now I have a key flat class. So what this key flat class does is it makes the black keys. So instead of having a white background, we have a black background. Obviously the height is going to be less than our white keys, the width is going to be less than our white keys. And I came up with these values literally just playing around with the CSS file, so there was no real science to it. So now that we have the CSS file, we want to add it to our div when it is a flat key. But how do we know when it's a flat key? So that's where this function comes in. So inside of our key class, I create a noteIsFlat function. And so this takes in the actual note that is coming in from the piano class. If you guys remember, we pass in like C, D flat, D, E flat, and those are just either one letter or two letters, right? So if the note is more than one letter in length, then we know it's a flat key. Is there another way we could have done this? Could we have passed it in a different prop? Yes, we could have done it a ton of different ways, but I just wanted to keep it super simple. And so I'm just going to check whether the length of the note is greater than 1. And if it is, then we know that the key is flat. And of course, if the key is flat, then we're going to add the flat to the class name. And one final thing to note, just so that you guys understand why I'm doing this, is if the note is flat, I don't want to display the actual note on it because I think the UI for that looked a little bit clunky. So I kind of just display the black div if the note is flat, and if it's not flat, then we just have our old code, right? We have our old code, which is just going to display the key. And of course, we just have to return whatever key is constructed. So let's see what it looks like now. So with that code implemented, we finally have a piano that looks reasonable. So the last thing to do with the UI is going to be changing the keyboard colors when a specific key is pressed. Now we're not handling user input just yet, but it will be good to be able to easily change the UI if there is any user input. So that's what we're going to be doing right now. And before we get into that, I have to mention this one update that I made to the constants.js file. I added these two extra constants, key to note and note to key. Key to note is just a mapping from the keys on my keyboard to the notes on the piano, the corresponding notes. So for example, if I were to press Z, that should correspond to the note C. If I were to press X, that should correspond to the note D. If I were to press D on my keyboard, that should correspond to the note E flat, and note to key is just the inverse of that. And you'll see how this comes into play in our next slide. So let's take a look at our piano component. Inside of our piano component, we now have a constructor. And in this constructor, we declare pressed keys to be part of the state of the piano. If the state changes, it'll be easy to re-render the component. That's sort of the perk of using React, is if anything in the state changes, then React will automatically re-render components. If we were to add or remove stuff from the pressed keys array, React should automatically re-render all the keys and pass in a new pressed keys array to all the keys. And that'll make it easy to change the UI of a specific key if it has been pressed. That's what's been changed in the piano class, but now let's take a look at what's changed inside of our key class. So previously we added the note is flat to our key class, and now we're going to be adding a new function called key is pressed into our key class. And here we're going to take in the note, the current note that is about to be rendered, as well as the list of pressed keys. And so all this function does, I don't want to get into the details here, but all this function does is checks if a current note is currently being played. If the note is being played, then we want to add another class to it. And this is going to be called the pressed class. So if a key is pressed, or if a key that is flat is pressed, then what we're going to do is just change the background color to blue. Simple enough. So in order to test that this is actually working, the best way to do it is with an example. So let's just say that we initialize the piano with the X key being pressed. If we look at this note to key mapping, we'll notice that X maps to D. When we're rendering D inside of the render function for our key component, where this is actually going to be returning true. So if we look at the piano, you'll notice that the D key is turned to blue. So the next part that we're going to do is actually just playing the piano. How are we going to do that? Inside of our piano component, we can add a new function called component did mount. Now this is a special function that runs after the piano component has been mounted, and what we want to add to this function are just two window event listeners, a KeyDown Listener and a KeyUp Listener. When a key is pressed, we want to add it to the pressed keys array inside of our state. And when we add it, it should change our entire piano. If you remove your hand from the key, if you remove your finger, then it's going to trigger the KeyUp function. And when you remove your finger from it, you want to remove that specific letter from the pressed keys array. And again, that will re-render the entire piano. So now let's just understand what these functions are doing. Whenever we press a specific key, the handle key down function on the piano class is going to run. Now, what does this function actually do? It takes an event. So the event is actually us pressing the key. And first it checks if the event is repeating. Now, if you press and hold down a specific key, for example, say you press Q and you hold it down, then that event is going to repeat indefinitely. That's why you're going to see like Q, 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 Q. You're going to see a ton of Qs on your screen. So that's why we initially start off by saying if the event is repeating, then we just return. If it's not repeating, then we actually get the key that is pressed, right? We get the key that is pressed, and we also get the keys that are already currently pressed. So I might be holding down a specific note, like I might be holding down the letter Z on my keyboard, I might be holding down X on my keyboard, and now I might be pressing B. So that's when this, key down is running. So we just have to check that it's not already inside of our pressed keys state, and also that the key that we're pressing is a valid key to press. So there's a ton of keys on my keyboard, like I could be pressing 1, 2, or 3, but that doesn't correspond to a valid key on our piano. If you guys remember, we have a note to key and a key to note mapping. Those are not all the keys on my keyboard, so I created a valid keys array, and that just makes sure that the key that we're pressing is a valid key, and if it is, then we add it to our updated pressed keys array, and then we set the state of our piano. And as soon as the state is set, the piano UI is going to re-render because it's been updated. And now let's take a look at the other function, which is the handle KeyUp function, which runs whenever we remove our finger from a pressed key. So in this case, all we want to do is find the index of the specific key that we removed our finger from. So for example, if there's Z and X and we're removing our finger from X, then the index would be 1. If we press 1 and we remove our finger from 1, then the index would be -1, because we never added the 1 key into our pressed keys, because it is not considered a valid key. Basically, all this handle KeyUp function does is it gets the index of the pressed key that we are removing our finger from, and it just removes it and updates the state. And this code is just a way to do that with React. And you'll notice here that I'm pressing Z, C, and H, and C, E, and A flat are currently pressed. If you guys have noticed by now, you'll realize that right now all we're doing is updating the UI. We're not actually playing the notes, and that's what we're going to be doing right now. Play the actual audio of the notes. So last year, Kyle from Web Dev Simplified created a piano in JavaScript, and to create that piano, he collected all these audio files. I just want to give credit where credit is due. These audio files are from Web Dev Simplified's JavaScript piano tutorial. That tutorial is linked down in the description box below if you guys want to learn how to create a piano using JavaScript. Thank you, Web Dev Simplified. So now let's actually look at what we're doing with the audio files. So inside of our public folder, I created a notes folder and just added the notes, and that just makes it easy to import inside of our React files. So in order to actually play audio files, you first have to import them onto the HTML page. So that's what we're doing here. There's a special HTML tag called audio, and we're going to add the ID to be the note itself, so that we can easily find the audio whenever we need to. And we're going to link the source. And this is pretty straightforward once again. We are just creating the audio files, and once we have the audio files, we just import it into our render function inside of our piano. So this is our piano, and right beneath our piano, we're going to have our audio files. Obviously, these audio files won't be visible, but we'll be able to call upon them, as we'll see in the next slide. Yeah, I mean, up until this point, we haven't actually been playing the audio. So on key down is when we want to play the note. So we want to play the note, and we want to play, and the note is corresponding to the key. So if we're pressing Z, then we want to play the key C. So we're going to pass in the actual note that we want to play. And this function is going to be a function on our piano class. And all it does is it checks if the note is empty. So it's possible that the note is empty if you're pressing like random buttons on your keyboard, like 1, 2, 3, 4, Q, W, E, R, T, Y, right? We don't actually have mappings for those keys, especially because this is a 12 key piano. If it's an 88 key piano, then it might be a little bit different. But for the case of our piano, it'll be empty. And if it's not empty and we're actually pressing a proper key, which maps to a note, then all we have to do is get the element by ID of that note, and then get the source of that object like this. We can just create a new audio object like this, and all we have to do is say note audio.play, and that basically plays the audio for us. So if we were to press Z, C, and H, once we've implemented the play note functionality, then you'll actually hear the sounds of the notes being played. So yeah, that's the final step in order to create our piano using reactjs. And that's going to be it for today's video. If you like this type of content and want to see more, just hit that like and subscribe, as I post new videos every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.